Hi, this is Tom Salemi. We're here at OIS at ASRS. I'm here with Cal Roberts, the Chief Medical Officer of Bausch Lomb. Cal, thank you for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure.
It's we talked probably about a year and a half ago about your becoming CMO at Bausch Lomb and how that happened. I want to get into that, but first I'm kind of curious about you. How did you find your way into ophthalmology?
Well, I actually got into ophthalmology for my desire to have contact lenses because I wore glasses as a child and I wanted to wear contact lenses, and my mother is a librarian, and so her first reaction to any new idea was, well, let's get a book about this. Okay. And so I started to read about eyes. And from that, I got a job in college working in a lab in ophthalmology. And one thing led to another.
So did you end up getting contact lenses?
I do. I wear them now. I wear Bausch Lomb contact lenses, of course. We have these wonderful contact lenses for presbyopia. And those still, I'm, of course, quite the young man. I can see distance. I can see near really very clearly.
I'll have to check those out. I need the help, and I think I mentioned that on camera a lot. So what did you enjoy most about being an ophthalmologist?
Oh, well, the gift of sight is so valuable. And it's really interesting. You know, we all know the data that people would rather lose a limb than lose their vision. People are more scared of going blind than they are of actually dying. And so the joy of being an ophthalmologist is really that opportunity that you can really do something to help someone's lifestyle, just by being able to help them with their eyes. And
how long did you practice for?
I practiced for 26 years.
And how did you find your way into working more closely with industry? I know Alimera was one of your first sort of business ventures that you became involved with. How did you migrate into that role?
Well, I was an academic, and I was working in the lab, and I had a basic science laboratory that was looking at corneal endothelial physiology. And then IOLAB Corporation, which was the ophthalmic division of J&J back in the 80s, came to me to ask me to work on a project to look at one of their products and look at its effect on the corneal endothelium. So that's how I got started with industry. And from there, I then evolved into the clinical development, and then as a speaker and a KOL. And so my career was going that way while my academic career at Cornell was progressing. And then the Alimera opportunity came when Dan Myers and his team was putting together the first idea for the team, and they asked me to be on the board of directors. And so I was on the original board of Alimera, which I still serve on, and that was a great experience for me. And then, as you know, in 2011, Brent Saunders called me and invited me to come to Bausch Lomb.
And I want to get into that in a minute, but I'm curious, in the 80s when you first started working with J&J, what was the feeling of industry, working with industry within the ophthalmology field? You hear stories, and it was more, I think, in the 70s, but into the 80s as well, where clinicians were looked at sideways if they worked too closely with industry. I don't get that sense that that's been an issue in ophthalmology, or was it an issue at one time and it just is no longer?
Well, I think that if I look back to what's happening in the 80s and 90s, I think there was the perception that industry did this and doctors did this. And there was very little crossing over between the two. And I think what we've learned since then is that when doctors come over to industry, wow, what a help they can be for industry. But similarly, if doctors allow industry to come over to their side, how much industry can actually help doctor in terms of the way they practice, in terms of staying up on innovation, education. There are a lot of ways that industry actually helps the practicing doctor to become a better doctor.
And you mentioned areas where that's introduced some efficiencies at Bausch Lomb. I think you had mentioned on a panel a year or two ago that it used to drive you nuts that you would have 3 or 4 sales reps from the same company come with one item and knock on your door, knock on your door, knock on your door. I think that's something that you're right, that industry, in retrospect, probably is painfully obvious, but it's one of those connections, I think, that where you're able to help smooth out the process.
Right, because back to this idea that when I was in practice, for one company had 6 different representatives who came to see me. And while I was trying to be polite and try to give them time, I always said to myself, gee, rather than have 6 people come see me once every 3 months, why don't you have one person come, really know what my needs are, and then have that person come every 2 weeks, and then in the end, that would be more efficient. Well, it made a lot of sense to me as a doctor. It actually makes no sense to industry. The industry really needs these silos and needs the representatives to be focusing on one or two products in order to be most effective. So those are the little bumps that still need a lot of work.
And I'm sure you're working on it.
Yeah.
You referenced the call from Brett Saunders. He called you in 2011. You said to be chief medical officer at Bausch Lomb. Just go back to that phone call. Was that something that you immediately jumped on and said yes? Did it require some thought, some consideration? And if so, what were you weighing?
Well, I think what I was weighing at that time was, as a practicing doctor, do I want to give up the care of patients in order to do this? Plus, if it didn't work out, oh my gosh, then what's going to happen to me next? Type of thing.
Always a good question.
Right. And so that there is a lot of risk. And some of my colleagues who've come over now be chief medical officers on the other companies are still keeping one toe in and still practicing on a limited basis. So in case this doesn't work out, they can go back. But what I did was to jump in really with both feet and really devote myself to this job. And it was a great call from Brent, and I've been really happy.
That's great. So did you sell your practice, or
I did? I sold my practice.
You just went out cold turkey.
I just went and sold the practice.
That's. I mean, because you're right. These things don't always work out,
don't.
especially you being one of the first. But it has worked out. Let's talk about why. What is your skill set as a physician? How has your skill set as a physician helped you at Bausch Lomb?
Yeah. So what I try to do is use the filter of a practicing doctor to the decisions that we make as a company, and say to myself, okay, does this make sense to a doctor? Does this make sense in the product development phase, in the R&D phase, when we get into commercial? Does this launch make sense? Is the way that we're going to package this and sell this make sense? And is the way that we're going to educate make sense? And so that if it makes sense to me, with my experience as a practicing doctor, then I really hope that it'll make sense to the other doctors who are out there. And so that's the role that I do. Now, the other part of what I do is actually just try to be the glue and try to marry what we're trying to do as a company with doctors. And try to use the relationships that I have over these years to try to find the right doctors who can help us as a company to cross over that barrier to come and help us. But we're going to go in this direction. Who over here could really help us? Type of thing. And that's another part. And then the third part is talking to other companies and trying to understand what they're doing. So much as what we're doing here at OIS, and where companies have this opportunity to present to the community. Well, I love OIS because here I have this opportunity to hear and then try to think about what they're doing and what we're doing at Bausch & Lomb and see, my gosh, is this a company that we should be partnering with in a way that would be advantageous to both companies?
Interesting. So if you were to meet someone at a cocktail party and they asked you, what does a CMO do? What would you tell them? What is your job description in 30 seconds or less?
Okay, so in 30 seconds, I tell people that my time at Bausch & Lomb is divided into exactly 3 areas. So number 1 is being with doctors. And with being with doctors, which is talking about our products, listening, getting feedback, getting ideas from doctors to bring that back into the company. Second is what I do within the company, and that is the committees that I'm on and the organizations that I'm part of and the opportunities that I have to grow our company internally. And then third is what I do externally with other companies and working with other companies, partnering with other companies so that we can grow Bausch & Lomb in partnership with other companies. So those are exactly the 3 things I do.
That's about 30 seconds. But it's a different type of job. You're a physician. I'm a writer. Different entirely different occupations, but in some way we work kind of alone. We kind of are self-contained unit. How hard was it to transition to a corporate culture where you're in the meetings, you're on the chain emails, you're part of teams, this and that?
Sure. Well, see, it's difficult, okay? And it's sometimes more difficult than someone when they come in realizes, because when you're a doctor out in practice, you are making decisions unilaterally all the time.
You have control, yeah.
All the time. This patient should do this. This one needs surgery. This one needs medicine. You need to come back in 2 weeks. You need to come back in a month. And you're making decisions for people and for your office all the time, unilaterally. When you're in industry, it's rare that you get to make a unilateral decision. What you need to do is to work with a group, build consensus, and so there's a little bit more of a politician who has to learn how to get people to work together than it is when you're just practicing on your own. And so I think that's the skill that if I was to speak to someone who's interested in coming into industry, that's what I ask them the most about. Are you willing to really give up that unilateral decision-making process that you do now for a group decision type of way of being successful? Okay, and that's to me the biggest difference from being in practice to being in industry.
You mentioned others were moving into the similar roles with different companies. Have you had people call you and say, "Hey, Cal, tell me about this"?
Absolutely. And I've spoken to most of the people who are now chief medical officer at the other company because they want to know.
Yeah.
So what's it like?
Yeah.
What can I expect? Sort of thing. And I think we have a really nice, good working relationship among the CMOs of the major companies. We got together at ASCRS and just kind of talk about the things we have in common. And so, yes, it's a good group.
Great. And finally, I don't want to let you go without telling us a bit about Bausch Lomb. What do you folks have going on that you're excited about?
Well, of all the years that I've been at Bausch Lomb, it's now 7 years, 2017 is for sure the most exciting. That we've already had 5 approvals from the FDA and our surgical business. The most exciting for me is our new vitrectomy system that we call Vitesse. And so vitrectomy really hasn't changed in the 40 years since Robert Mackramer developed it in the 70s. Essentially, what Mackramer developed was a system that pulled vitreous into a needle and then cut it. And so you had this pulling into the needle. And we all know that when you pull whatever comes with the vitreous. And so what we wanted to do at Bausch & Lomb was change that paradigm to instead of pull, then cut, to cut first, and then only aspirate that which had been cut. And so our new Vitesse system is unique in that instead of having this mechanical guillotine cutter, what it has is a disruptive hypersonic technology that occurs right at the surface of the needle, not within. And what that allows you to do is to disrupt the vitreous and then only aspirate that's already been cut. And so that we believe what that's going to do is decrease the amount of traction that occurs, and we think it's going to be a better process.
So when you hear that process, that product as a CMO and as a former physician, is that the time where those physician training kicks in and you go, by God, that's going to work. That makes so much sense.
Right, absolutely. And I've been an advocate for this technology since we started to develop it, because I could see immediately how much potential this had to really improve the process of vitrectomy. So that's why I'm really very proud of this product.
Excellent. Well, I'm very grateful for you to take a few minutes with us today.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.